If you currently are a convertible bond hedge fund or a bond desk and you're not in this trade, you're getting absolutely crushed publicly and embarrassed by your competitors that are in the trade.
Bitcoin does not kill the dollar. Bitcoin pulls value from other store value assets. The dollar doesn't have to die for Bitcoin to succeed.
Bitcoin doesn't need to steal from any of the other buckets of store of value to hit $20 million a coin. It can just expand the TAM for store of value. Companies that are unloved from a multiple standpoint because they cash flow, but they aren't growing, that's usually a good target now for private equity. And now everyone kind of understands that there's an optimal amount of leverage to add to the balance sheet, meaning you should take out some debt and service that debt with your cash flows. Use all the tools at your disposal to lever up and buy Bitcoin.
The amount of publicly listed companies have been going down. Private equity and venture have been going up. I personally know a handful of friends who have bought companies back from private equity because they ran it into the ground. So now maybe there's another option where these companies don't have to sell to private equity. They can just take the cash flow they have and then lever that up.
Yeah, cash is king all over again because the cash can become Bitcoin.
So it gives them an option that wasn't on the table, and now there's another way they can grow their business without private equity.
The US actually buying Bitcoin, there's two levels of a US SBR. One would be saying, hey, we're just going to hold on to what we have because they've confiscated coins from various cases over the years. They have a little over 200,000 coins in custody.
Right.
So they could just keep that. As far as actually buying Bitcoin.
All right, Cory Klippsten, founder, CEO of Swan Bitcoin. Pleasure. I've been trying to get you down here to the studio for like ever, it seems like.
Yeah, well, you had to entice me with a holiday party because that's a 3.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
I just got here.
The drive the drive is brutal. Southern California. You don't have to go very far. So we have a holiday party tonight. The Bitcoin coastal party.
Coastal California.
And you and I have talked about bringing Bitcoiners to Southern California for a while. Yeah. And you've done well with that with your live events, the salons, the Swan salons that you do on a regular basis. So sorry to miss that last one. I was the sickest I've ever been. Don't need to go into that. But tonight, I mean, in my tiny little beach town down here where there's nobody around here, we have like 150 people registered. Yeah. And it kind of shows where we're at in the market. But we're running short on time, and I want to jump into a couple big topics. You, with Swan Bitcoin, kind of pioneered, really pushed through like the Bitcoin only company, exchange, and really pioneered that. Did really, really good job with the education, the content around that. And I know you've spent time previous to that in traditional finance, TradFi, if you will, and even with Swan, a lot of time in TradFi as well.
That's right.
So I want to talk about that specifically right now, and really what's going on with MicroStrategy, MicroSailor, which seems to be the hottest topic in the world right now. But what I want to ask, because it seems like I'm seeing, just coming back from Abu Dhabi, the capital of capital, they call it, Bitcoin is coming into finance in all kinds of creative ways. Do you think what he's doing is shifting this Overton window? Is it reinventing corporate balance sheets, the way bonds are being done? Like, what are you seeing from that?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing with, in particular, what I would call leveraged Bitcoin equities, like MicroStrategy, I think similar is probably the purest follower that's kind of on the MicroStrategy playbook and is kind of the second real LBE. You also have Marathon and Riot doing this to some degree. Obviously much bigger companies than similar, so they're kind of doing it, but they're a little bit more encumbered by their business model. Whereas MicroStrategy's business model is kind of orthogonal and not important to the LBE strategy. So it's not a positive or a negative. Similarly with Similar, not a positive or a negative. But I liken this, and I've been talking a lot with folks on Wall Street, this feels a lot like LBOs in the 80s, so leverage buyouts. And it's something that wasn't done before, and it's a bit of an unlock to the capital structure. So this was a lot of companies realizing that, hey, these companies that are unloved from a multiple standpoint because they cash flow, but they aren't growing, that's usually a good target now for private equity. And that didn't used to be done. And now everyone kind of understands that there's an optimal amount of leverage to add to the balance sheet, meaning you should take out some debt and service that debt with your cash flows and use that to buy back stock. Or in this case, now the new theme is not LBOs, but LBEs, and use that cash flow or use that arbitrage between your market cap and the net asset value of your Bitcoin in the way that MicroStrategy is doing. Use all the tools at your disposal to lever up and buy Bitcoin. And I think that's what's going on. I do think at some point it'll overshoot and there will be a mania at some point, and that's fine. Everyone will call bubble. It'll actually just be a local top. There will be a crash, and then it will surge back up. And at some point, when we look back 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, these LBEs will be a huge category of companies. There will be coverage groups at Wall Street, investment banks that focus just on this, and a lot of them are starting to think about spinning up right now. So that's what's happening.
So let me kind of recite this and see if we got this right. So there's sort of this category of business. So first of all, we've seen that over the last decade or so, couple decades, the amount of publicly listed companies have been going down. Mm-hmm. Private equity and venture have been going up. So a lot of companies are going that path. There's a lot of companies who are unloved, to your words that you used, public companies, because they're just low growth companies. So like a software company like MicroStrategy, which has a steady customer base. It's a very sticky product, so the cash flow is really good, but there's no growth really, so there's not a good multiple. So there's a lot of those types of businesses. They're good businesses, but they're not sexy. They're not growing fast. So that's a prime takeout for private equity. But what you're saying is private equity, back to a mania. We've sort of seen a private equity mania. We've seen the fallout of that. I personally know a handful of friends who have bought companies back from private equity because they ran into the ground. So now maybe there's another option where these companies don't have to sell to private equity. They can just take the cash flow they have and then lever that up.
Yeah, cash is king all over again because the cash can become Bitcoin.
So it gives them an option that wasn't on the table, and now there's another way they can grow their business without private equity.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. Now, would this become a mania? Some might call it a Ponzi scheme because you're just basically having this reflexive loop of levering it up. And this reflexive loop, it's now created a mania. It's like, well, shoot, it worked so well for MicroStrategy. They've been like, I think, the best performing stock over the last 4 years, if not certainly one of them. So then now we're seeing a lot of people starting to rush to adopt that. So could this turn into a mania, sort of like the private equity bubble? Maybe we've seen this obviously through a couple different ones. How far away do you think we are from something like that? Or are we just in the early innings of this?
It's the earliest of the early innings because there's really only one company actually executing it today. Right. And Semler got their options listed yesterday morning. I think they started trading.
Okay.
And that's kind of required to be on the full LBE strategy or LBE playbook, is to have those options, because if you're going to lever up, the easiest instrument to do that with is these convertible bonds. That's all the offerings that MicroStrategy has been doing the last few years. And to do that, over 80% of the buy volume is going to come from these convertible bond funds, the hedge funds, that want to hedge it off right away and isolate the bond from the call option. Yeah. And they need those options to be able to do that, right? So you've got a bond, and then you've got the stock, and then you've got the option, and they need to be able to sell a call option to match the implied call option that's embedded in the convert, so that they can just be neutral in their position. And, kind of the magic of what Saylor and Shirish and the MicroStrategy team have been doing is they're deliberately pricing this under what it's worth, which is why they fly off the shelves and they're always oversubscribed, and it's just always a hot ticket. And so now this, cadre of bankers that controls who gets access to it, they get to be kingmakers, they get to move up in their league tables. And it's just created this kind of this swell of like trying to be in the club. And there's a bunch of people not in the club, both the sellers club of the banks that get to sell the bonds and the buyers club. Which hedge fund gets 200 million, which gets 400 million, which doesn't get in, right? Or which pension fund doesn't get in, or does Allianz get in the initial offering, or do they have to buy it aftermarket like they did? They bought the March convert last month. Yeah. So if Semler can move up the league table, or even companies that may or may not be, depending on your opinions, like as good a fit for the strategy, like a Marathon or a Riot. You saw Marathon issue 1.8 billion of converts at zero coupon in 1 month in November. And that's a Bitcoin miner that, some would say is kind of negatively pro-cyclical with an LBE strategy in a bear market, because that's usually when miners sell Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin price would be under pressure, your stock's under pressure, and you need to invest a lot and probably sell a lot of assets to build for the next bull market. So it's maybe not the best fit there. But anyway, it's all fascinating. It's fun, as you mentioned, as somebody that does have an MBA in finance from 20 years ago, but has been in startups for the last 10, 12 years, to dust all of that off and, check the Rolodex and see where people are sitting now 20 years after I graduated from business school and they're all on Wall Street running shit.
Yeah.
And now they all want to talk.
But just like Bitcoin is reinventing a lot of things, but it's reinventing finance, it's reinventing the way we think about that. Obviously, a lot of it because of the returns, the way that the collateral works. Is this reinventing sort of this market and creating this new market, or is it only kind of the same old playbook with just new asset? And the reason why I ask that is because I see a lot of TradFi guys, the CNBC guys, et cetera, a lot of guys on Twitter who just can't seem to grasp this.
Yeah.
And this has to be the biggest bubble, the biggest Ponzi in the world. So what are they missing? Is it being reinvented, or what is it that they're missing? Or is something so new they just haven't caught on yet?
So I want to say two things. One is, I don't know what the number of hours is now, given that Bitcoin signal's pretty strong, but it's still probably 100 hours.
1,000.
Maybe 1,000 to get like conviction about Bitcoin. But like if you were only reading the right things, you could probably get pretty close, I think, in 100 hours of focus study.
Yeah.
The incremental 10 or 20 that you need to understand the leveraged Bitcoin equity strategy is on top of having conviction on Bitcoin in the first place.
Right.
Otherwise, you just
and some underlying business finance.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah. Then there's a bunch of other things. That's assuming that you come from TradFi and already have that background and understand converts and options and delta hedging, gamma hedging, volatility smiles, like all the different things that you need to kind of understand. You would still need to get over the hump on Bitcoin to really get in. But the second thing I would say, and we were kind of talking about this in the pre-show, institutions that got into Bitcoin before this MicroStrategy pump in the fall and after the election and everything kind of opted in. They didn't have to, right? It's like, okay, Larry Fink saw the opportunity and Abby at Fidelity saw the opportunity. The Vanguard and the Schwabs didn't see it or didn't want to make the play. Buffett didn't want to make the play. Nothing was dragging them kicking and screaming into Bitcoin. If you currently are a convertible bond hedge fund or a bond desk and you're not in this trade, you're getting absolutely crushed publicly and embarrassed by your competitors that are in the trade. And so, I was just out in New York and hosted an event last Monday. Seems like forever ago. This was 9 days ago. And, usually when you interface with TradFi about Bitcoin, you might sort of call 10 people and get 2 to show up. In this case, we called like 10 people and 30 showed up.
Wow.
They brought friends and the friends brought friends. And we had one of the big IB's whole convert desk came, and, a couple of the analysts came from another bank, and, a guy that runs 300 bankers at Goldman came from the markets group, and they're all there asking about Bitcoin. And thank goodness we had 5 or 6 people that knew enough to kind of, be the center of the semicircle in these groups. But the reason they're there is they're getting dragged kicking and screaming into it. They can't not be in it. They have to know about it now. It's not optional. For real, for institutions. So the way I see it, this red wave with the election, this sort of more and more people who have credibility on Wall Street and in TradFi actually having done the work and understanding not just Bitcoin, but also this LBE playbook and gaining conviction on it and being able to explain it with the credibility of their resume and the schools they went to and the jobs that they've had to people that look like them. Mm-hmm. That's institutional adoption.
Yeah. One thing this presentation I gave at Bitcoin Mina 2 weeks ago, I think, I talked about this evolutionary process and mapping Bitcoin's adoption cycle over a 50-year period. And I talked about how the seeds of institutional adoption came early, 2013, VC started coming in, 2017, Fidelity came in. So it came. So we've been, and then the CME, CBOE futures came in 2017. Yeah. So institutions were coming. But it's not really until now. So the seeds were there, right? But 2010 to 2020 was more like the frenzy. That was like retail. 2020 to 2030 is then like this institutional piece. And we're seeing it, right? So now front and center. For like a company like Swan Bitcoin, you're not a publicly traded company. You don't have the options like this. How do you think about applying and if you don't want to give us proprietary secrets, but how do businesses think about applying Bitcoin to their businesses, their balance sheets, things like that, if they can't play in that type of a market?
Yeah. So, for us, we do have a Bitcoin treasury and we have a Bitcoin treasury strategy, and we talk about it with the board and we set rules and we accumulate Bitcoin over time. And, the goal, as I've often stated publicly, like we do intend to be a public company, and there is a very strong rationale for doing a flavor of an LBE playbook as a public company if you're a company like Swan. Right. It kind of makes sense. You would have, Swan shareholders would be natural clients, just like we have a lot of MicroStrategy and similar shareholders who are Swan clients for all of their other Bitcoin needs, whether they want, to buy real Bitcoin or custody it or collaborative custody or IRAs or whatever. So that synergy is definitely there and has a logic to it. And then we obviously need to be up to speed on this for all of our company clients, because we have over 2,000 business clients at Swan that we serve that are stacking, for their balance sheet. And so, they're looking at this for, okay, what parts of that LBE playbook can I apply to my business? Okay.
So then are you trying to kind of consult them and help them a little bit?
We do every day. Nice. Yeah, we do every day. And we've been doing that for years. We've had business clients since early.
Are they also being dragged into this kicking and screaming? Meaning they see, it's like the gunpowder analogy, right?
They're doing it optionally. Yeah. The gunpowder analogy, which I'm sure a million people have tweeted out recently, but it actually applies now for real. I think is very applicable to these people that are in the convertible bond business. And as we saw this morning, MicroStrategy is going to issue normal corporate debt, fixed coupon debt, probably in January.
Yeah.
So that's a much bigger pie. It's 100 times bigger than the converts.
Yeah. I launched a company called Matador.
Yep.
In the Toronto Stock Exchange, the venture exchange, went live trading Monday, a couple of days ago. So we raised a bunch of money for Bitcoin, and we're deploying a similar strategy.
Nice.
We're hopefully a little micro play off of that. So we're hoping to kind of maybe get to those markets as well.
Sometimes those percentage gains on the small guys, as you've seen with MetaPlanet and similar.
Yeah. So we're like a sister company with MetaPlanet. So we have a lot of data going back and forth, but we're hoping to basically deploy the same strategy here in North America. So that's pretty exciting. Okay. So yeah, it's changing everything. Now it's in the 100, the NASDAQ 100, right? I mean, and so the world of finance is very competitive.
Yes.
Is kind of what you're saying. And the reason why they're being dragged in kicking and screaming is because they're getting smoked by companies that have applied this strategy. Mm-hmm. And so because it's so competitive, the gunpowder analogy, if you want to compete, then you have to do this. That's the game theory.
Yep.
Okay. So we have that happening right now, obviously. Now let's jump to the higher level, which is the other part of this institutional or sovereign FOMO. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine the way that I see it is the same game theory that applies to, because the world's run on competition, the same game theory that applies to institutions also applies to sovereigns. So now we have talk of the United States opening up a SBR, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. Lots of talk of other nations doing that. We can talk about that specifically, but my question is, right now, I've been seeing some chatter, and Nick Carter just came on, and he thinks it's a bad idea for the government to do that because it would signal that that's the end of the dollar. Curious your take on that.
So let's lay out for the audience what rumors are kind of out there. So there's two levels of a U.S. SBR. One would be saying, hey, we're just going to hold on to what we have because they've confiscated coins from various cases over the years. They have a little over 200,000 coins in custody.
Right.
So they could just keep that. I think there's a much more than 50% chance that happens. I think there's still a...
Much more than 50? So 60?
More than 50. It's ticking up. It's ticking up because you're seeing a lot of members of the Trump administration talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think he wants to chalk up that win, and it doesn't require a budgetary process to do it.
Right.
So I think that they'll probably do that and call it a W, that, hey, we have an SBR and we delivered on our campaign promise, whatever, and everybody has a party. I'm still in the camp, although it's ticking up. I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, the U.S. actually buying Bitcoin was probably low single-digit percentage chance in my mind. And now I'd say it's like upper single-digit percentage chance. So it went from like a 3 to an 8 or a 9.
It was a 25 to 30% chance on Polymarket.
For what specifically? Having an SBR?
Will Trump create Bitcoin reserve in the first 100 days?
Right. So that's what I have at 60, 70%.
Yeah. So it was as high as... It was as high as 39, or it was as high as 40. Right now, it's sitting at 34% chance.
So I'm a buyer on that bet because
that's a good bet.
Because that's just, do you keep the Bitcoin that you have and call it an SBR? As far as actually buying Bitcoin, I don't think it will happen. I think
it says the market will resolve to yes if the government holds any amount of Bitcoin in its reserves at any point.
Right. So I think they will do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's
before April 29, 2025.
Makes sense. Little time box on it.
Note, the U.S. government confiscating Bitcoin does not count as holding Bitcoin reserves.
That's a tough one. So,
but if they move it over, there's not enough details here.
So they would have to move it. I think so what I'm saying, leave polymarket aside. What I'm saying is, if they actually create something that, substantively is called the SBR, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, or similar, and they actually place this confiscated Bitcoin and move it out of the DOJ or the FBI or whoever's holding it and put it in that's a Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. That's what I think there's more than a 50% chance happening.
Yeah.
I think there's a sub 10% chance that the U.S. actually buys Bitcoin with its own budget. What you were saying in the pre-show, Powell said we can't do that today. So there would be a new law that needs to get passed. I just think with all the different priorities that the new administration has, they're not going to, that's something that's going to get horse traded away in favor of, more Department of Governmental Efficiency or, whatever it is that their other priorities are. Something will distract
I'm afraid you
them.
could be right. It sounds like a pretty reasonable.
But it's okay. We're also not going to get, no cap gains tax.
Yeah.
Like that's been bandied about. That's a pipe dream to get rid of cap gains tax on Bitcoin in the next 2 years. One
thing that I would say, though, why I think that is a big win, I talked to my fund partners, Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, today, and we were talking about this, and they were also saying that the market, some of my partners were thinking that the market has priced in this buying on the SBR and getting up to 1 million, right, 200,000 a year for the next 5 years. And if that doesn't happen, then the market would be disappointed and potentially sell off. And I said, sort of like you, I said, even if we just keep these coins and move them over, I think that's a win. And here's why I think that's a win. Because when I was at Bitcoin MENA, Trump sent his delegates over there. He didn't go, but Eric Trump was there. Paul Manafort was there, right, speaking. And just them showing up, I think, said something. And they went to the Capitol. There was a lot of meetings going on there. Eric Trump said that Bitcoin's going to be a lot higher. It's kind of like that.
It's a great speech.
It's like that inside.
It was a great speech.
Right? But what I picked up from having lots of backroom conversations there is that all of these big players, the sheiks and sovereigns, wealth funds, et cetera, over there are already positioning for the space race, the nuclear arms race, if you will, but they don't want to front run the U.S. They're afraid that Trump might do like a threat like he did with BRICS, like, hey, if you move away from the dollar, 100% tariffs on you. So they're almost doing it like in this coordinated fashion where, hey, we're all ready, but let's let Trump announce it first, and then we all come out at one time.
Yeah.
And so what I was saying is I think even though maybe the market's disappointed that we don't get the 200,000 a year purchase, the green light to the world to move, I think, is pretty big.
I tend to agree with that. So I missed all the rumors and maybe confirmation other than just somebody calling me on my way into the studio. But I guess there's firmish rumors of UAE having already acquired 300,000 or 400,000 coins. Did you see anything on this?
I've seen the chatter. I don't know. If
nothing close to confirmed.
I don't think so.
Rumor. Okay,
yeah. I've seen it.
Okay,
it's all over.
So something like that would make sense. I think you're also seeing, like there's just so much being added to the Bitcoin mining space. You saw the Chinese car maker this morning announce that they bought 50 exahash worth of machines from Bitmain.
Yeah.
Like they vaulted to be the third biggest mining company in the world today. And nobody knew about it before, basically.
Let's jump back to the SBR though for a minute, because I want to go back to the dollar. So I think that Bitcoin does not kill the dollar. Bitcoin pulls value from other store value assets. Mm-hmm. So it'll pull money from gold, it'll pull money from real estate, stocks, bonds, et cetera. The dollar doesn't have to die for Bitcoin to succeed. The US already stockpiles gold. If they announce that they're buying more gold, they're resuming gold buying, that doesn't sink the dollar.
I had So I agree with you on the dollar point. I also had another epiphany, which I'm sure I probably read somewhere, but I thought I had an original idea a couple weeks ago. So, we draw this box of the 1 quadrillion of store of value assets. Mm-hmm. We always, in the Bitcoin space, we talk about having low time preference versus high time preference. Bitcoin doesn't need to steal from any of the other buckets of store of value to hit $20 million a coin. It can just expand the TAM for store of value.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it will probably it'll steal share from these, but it doesn't actually even require people to sell real estate. It just requires people to choose to store their incremental value in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it really, you don't even need to compete at all.
Yeah.
We add more profits every year as humans. We grow GDP 3 or 4% for 8 billion people. All of that can be stored in Bitcoin incrementally. And so it probably will relatively demonetize gold, and it'll suck some of the premium away from real estate and everything, but it's not even required to have Bitcoin become massive.
Gold will continue to grow, but Bitcoin grows much faster.
Fastest.
So the talk I gave at Bitcoin Mina, as I told you earlier, was mapping out the 50-year cycle. And at each stage, that chart of the store of value assets, I showed where I think that goes to. And I mapped out where I think all the store of value assets go. So a lot of people don't realize that, of course, gold goes up, but all the store of value assets do. And so I used historical numbers as well as CBO projections, because they project through 2054. So for the next 30 years. So I just projected deficit and debt limits that they've given us with historical numbers, and we project out where real estate will be, where gold will be, where bonds will be, where equities will be, based off of those growth rates that they've told us. Mm-hmm. And so we're up to 8.6 quadrillion. 8.6 quadrillion in store of value assets. And so if Bitcoin gets 20% of that, of 8.6 quadrillion. Now, I think by 2050, Bitcoin is the second largest asset class behind real estate because it's outpaced the growth of all those other ones, but gold's 40 trillion too, right? But yeah, it doesn't mean the dollar has to die. So that's why I think I just don't see how that signals the end of the dollar. But back to Jerome Powell's statement and to the point that you referenced, he said that the Fed can't own Bitcoin because of a law. But the Fed doesn't own gold either.
Right.
So I don't think anybody's expecting the Fed to buy Bitcoin, right? It was the U.S. Treasury.
Makes sense.
The reserve. We've also seen that the Fed can change the rules and buy other assets anytime they want as well. I would also just say back to this competition of Wall Street and funds being dragged in, as you said, kicking and screaming, and then other governments, and maybe they are waiting for the U.S. to sort of move first and everyone move. And of course, Russia's announced things about Russia changed their regulations around taxes on Bitcoin mining, which I thought was pretty important. They're only doing that if there's something going on there. So those countries maybe are trying to preempt them. But we've seen in history, right, the space race and the nuclear arms race. Mm-hmm. We saw when the whole world switched to the gold standard. Right, in the 1800s. So it's we've seen these before. It's not ancient history. Mm-hmm. When nations start competing, things start moving pretty fast.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what was another really interesting meeting out there. I went and met with a generally commodities-focused investment bank. So it's kind of a boutique that focuses on, gold miners and oil reserves and things like that. And they're going deep on Bitcoin, because their LPs and their clients are going deep on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so they're, kind of talking to us and seeing if this is a vertical that they should create, and do they need to assign bankers? Do they need to hire new bankers to do this thing? And, that's just a normal everyday conversation on the street now.
It's amazing. You would think, just like the car company in China, any of these companies that are dealing in commodities, it's an energy intensive industry. So they have lots of energy. Why wouldn't they offset some of those costs? Mm-hmm. So it seems again, as we said earlier, Bitcoin is just going to expand rapidly into every little area that we didn't even plan for.
Yeah.
We got a party to go to.
We do indeed.
Is there anything else that you want to close it out with or leave us with?
Oh yeah. We just, so what day is it? It's Wednesday. Is it the 18th?
19th. Oh, yeah, 18th.
18th.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. This morning we just announced the Swan Bitcoin rewards credit card.
Oh, great. So tell us how it works.
It's just a Bitcoin rewards credit card. Instead of getting miles or cash back, you get Bitcoin back.
Okay.
So It'll be popular among the Bitcoiners. It functions just like the BlockFi card that existed for 6 months before they blew
fill
up.
out a credit application, get an actual credit card, you get a credit limit.
Yep, it's a MasterCard issued by a big bank, the whole deal. But
can you say what percentage back you get?
No, I can't yet.
Not yet.
We're working out the details, but yeah, it should be pretty exciting. But the waitlist is open, swan.com/card.
Nice. We'll put a link to that down below.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Cory.
Thanks for having me on.